Judy Garland, the girl who couldn't escape Oz. She was the brightest voice of a troubled generation, a teenager asked to sparkle while barely allowed to sleep. That contradiction radiant on screen, fragile off it became Judy Garland's quiet burden. Born Frances Ethel Gumm in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, in 1922, she grew up touring in her parents' vaudeville act. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer signed her in her early teens. By 1939, she was Dorothy, skipping down a painted yellow brick road. Fame arrived like a flood. Studio handlers monitored every bite she ate, every pound on a scale, every hour she rested. Doctors on call offered pep to work and medicine to sleep, beginning a cycle that would shadow her adult life. The rise was dazzling. Babes in Arms, Meet Me and Street Louis, Easter Parade. Yet the girl celebrated for her warmth was told she was not pretty enough, not thin enough, not perfect enough. A relentless schedule, public scrutiny, and financial instability made home feel elusive. There were brave reinventions. After setbacks in the late 1940s, she reclaimed stages worldwide, then returned to film with A Star is Born in the mid-1950s, delivering a performance many consider her finest. But the demands never softened. Marriages frayed. Trusts failed. The pressure to be endlessly luminous remained. In June of 1969 in London, Judy Garland died under sad circumstances. The coroner recorded an accidental barbiturate overdose. She was 47. Marilyn Monroe, the lonely icon. Few images are as enduring as Marilyn Monroe's playful smile, a white dress caught in a breeze, or the way she lit up comedies with a sparkle that seemed effortless. Yet behind the icon was Norma Jean, a woman shaped by instability, searching endlessly for love and carrying an emptiness no spotlight could fill. Born in Los Angeles in 1926, Norma Jean Mortensen never knew a steady home. Her mother struggled with mental illness, and Marilyn spent much of her childhood in foster care or with guardians. Modeling offered escape, and by the early 1950s, she had transformed into Hollywood's newest blonde sensation. Films like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and How to Marry a Millionaire cemented her as the world's most bankable star. But Monroe wanted to be more than a symbol of beauty. She studied acting seriously, moved to New York, and founded her own production company in an era when few women dared to. Her performances in Bus Stop and The Misfits revealed emotional depth. Still, she felt typecast, underestimated, and trapped between the image the public adored and the woman she longed to be. Her private life mirrored the instability of her youth. Marriages to Joe DiMaggio and Arthur Miller brought moments of joy, but both ended in heartbreak. Marilyn struggled with insomnia, anxiety, and a growing reliance on pills to keep up with relentless pressures. Rita Hayworth, the actress with a shattered heart. To millions, Rita Hayworth was the embodiment of allure, with fiery red hair, luminous eyes, and an elegant sway that captured every frame. Yet the woman who defined glamour in the 1940s often felt like a stranger in her own life, reshaped by Hollywood and betrayed by the very dream it promised. Born Margarita Carmen Cancino in Brooklyn in 1918, she was introduced to performance early, dancing with her father in shows across the country. But when Hollywood beckoned, the studios decided her natural identity wasn't enough. Her hairline was painfully reshaped with electrolysis. Her dark hair dyed a vivid red, and her name changed to Rita Hayworth. Overnight, she became a fantasy the world could adore, but at the cost of erasing pieces of herself. Her career soared. In 1946, she became one of Columbia Pictures' brightest stars. The publicity machine labeled her irresistible, the woman men dreamed of. Yet Rita longed for something far simpler, to be loved for who she truly was. Her marriages reflected that yearning. Orson Welles, Prince Ali Khan, and others filled her life with passion but ended in heartbreak. She once confessed with a trace of bitterness, "Men go to bed with Gilda, but they wake up with me." It was her way of saying that no one wanted to know the real Rita. As the years passed, her struggles deepened. In the 1970s, she began showing troubling symptoms of memory loss and confusion. It would later be diagnosed as early-onset Alzheimer's disease, a cruel illness that was little understood at the time. Misinterpreted as instability, it quietly robbed her of dignity and independence. James Dean, Rebel Without Time. James Dean's entire film career spanned just 3 starring roles, yet his impact reshaped American culture. He became the eternal face of youthful rebellion, a symbol of restlessness in a post-war world. But his legend is as much about how he lived as how suddenly his life was cut short. Born in Marion, Indiana, in 1931, Dean's childhood was marked by the loss of his mother when he was only 9. Raised thereafter by relatives, he grew up shy, withdrawn, and restless. Acting became his refuge, a way to channel the emotions he carried so heavily. Moving first to New York, Dean trained seriously, drawing inspiration from the actor's studio and method acting techniques that emphasized raw authenticity. When he arrived in Hollywood, casting directors quickly recognized something magnetic about him. In East of Eden, 1955, he gave a performance so vulnerable and electric that critics hailed him as a rising genius. Later that year came Rebel Without a Cause, where he embodied the frustrations and longings of an entire generation. With Giant, his final film, Dean proved he could stand alongside legends like Elizabeth Taylor and Rock Hudson. Off-screen, however, his hunger for intensity found dangerous outlets. He loved racing cars, often pushing them to their limits on highways and racetracks. Friends described him as both brilliant and unpredictable, thoughtful one moment, reckless the next. That restlessness became part of his mystique. On September 30th, 1955, Dean was driving his Porsche Spyder when he collided head-on with another car on a California highway. Errol Flynn, the scandal-plagued swashbuckler. Few stars captured the spirit of adventure like Errol Flynn. With his flashing grin, easy charm, and athletic grace, he defined the swashbuckler on screen. From Captain Blood to the adventures of Robin Hood, Flynn seemed larger than life. Yet off-screen, his life was marked by recklessness, scandal, and decline. Born in Tasmania in 1909, Flynn drifted through a restless youth before stumbling into acting. Warner Brothers discovered his charisma, and by the mid-1930s, he was one of their biggest box office draws. Women adored him, men envied him, and critics praised his natural flair. But his success came with shadows. Flynn's appetite for excess parties, alcohol, and a lavish lifestyle often landed him in the headlines. In 1942, he faced a highly publicized trial on charges that could have ended his career. Though he was acquitted, the ordeal tarnished his reputation permanently, and, "in like Flynn," became a phrase both mocking and defining. Still, he continued to land roles. But the reckless living only accelerated. His health began to deteriorate, and his once youthful vitality faded. Flynn himself seemed aware of his contradictions. In his autobiography, he admitted, "I like my whiskey old, my women young, and myself not old." The line, half a joke, also revealed a man desperately running from time itself. By the 1950s, his career had dwindled to smaller, less celebrated parts. Heavy drinking and financial troubles plagued him, and friends worried about his decline. In October 1959, while visiting Vancouver, Errol Flynn died suddenly at just 50 years old. Frances Farmer, the star broken by institutions. Frances Farmer's life is often remembered less for her promising talent and more for the suffering she endured under an unforgiving system. Once hailed as one of the most promising actresses of the 1930s, she became a cautionary tale of how Hollywood and society failed to protect the vulnerable. Born in Seattle in 1913, Frances was intelligent, outspoken, and unwilling to conform. Hollywood noticed her talent, and by the late 1930s she was appearing in major films, including Come and Get It and Son of Fury. Critics admired her raw presence, predicting she might become one of the greats. But Frances was not easily molded. She resisted publicity stunts, rejected the glamour machine, and refused to play the part of the perfect starlet. Studio heads branded her difficult. As her career faltered, she began to experience bouts of erratic behavior. and her struggles with mental health became increasingly visible. In the early 1940s, Frances was institutionalized in psychiatric hospitals. Reports from her years inside are haunting. Electroshock treatments, confinement, and, according to some accounts, physical mistreatment. Whether every story is accurate or exaggerated, one truth remains: she endured profound suffering. By the time she was released, the Hollywood dream was gone. Farmer tried small comebacks, including television appearances in the 1950s, but her career never regained its promise. She lived quietly, far from the stardom once predicted for her, until her death in 1970 at the age of 56. Frances Farmer's story is a reminder of how fragile brilliance can be, and how quickly society abandons those who need compassion the most. Jean Harlow, The Platinum Tragedy. Before Marilyn Monroe or Jane Mansfield, there was Jean Harlow, the original blonde bombshell. With her platinum hair, mischievous smile, and sparkling energy, she became one of the brightest stars of the 1930s. Yet her life, like her meteoric fame, was heartbreakingly brief. Born Harley and Harlow Carpenter in Kansas City in 1911, Jean was pushed into film work by her mother, who dreamed of Hollywood success. By 1930, she had caught the attention of Howard Hughes, appearing in Hell's Angels and instantly commanding public fascination. Within a few years, she signed with MGM, and the studio carefully crafted her into a sensation. Audiences adored her. Films like Red Dust, Dinner at 8, and Bombshell showcased her rare gift for both comedy and sensuality. Critics praised her timing, while fans fell in love with her magnetic charm. She was nicknamed the Baby on set, a reflection of her innocence off-screen, though publicity painted her as a daring vamp. Behind the sparkle, however, Jean's personal life was far from easy. Her second husband, producer Paul Byrne, died under mysterious circumstances in 1932, a tragedy that haunted her. She also faced constant pressure from MGM, which monitored her image closely. And while the public saw her as flawless, her health was quietly deteriorating. In the spring of 1937, while filming Saratoga with Clark Gable, Jean fell gravely ill. She complained of pain and fatigue, which doctors at the time misdiagnosed. Within days, she slipped into kidney failure, a condition incurable at the time. On June 7th, she died at just 26. Her death stunned Hollywood. Thousands of fans attended her funeral, mourning a life cut short at its peak. Jean Harlow's brilliance burned quickly, leaving behind a legend that still glows and a reminder of how fragile even the brightest lights can be. Clark Gable, The King's Hidden Sorrows. Clark Gable was the King of Hollywood, a title that captured his rugged charm and commanding presence. From his Oscar-winning turn in It Happened One Night to his immortal role as Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind, he seemed to embody masculine confidence. Yet behind the bravado, Gable carried private sorrows that shadowed his life. Born in Ohio in 1901, Gable worked his way from odd jobs and stage roles to Hollywood stardom. By the mid-1930s, he was the undisputed leading man, admired for his mix of toughness and humor. He married several times, but it was his union with actress Carole Lombard that brought him true happiness. Their playful, affectionate relationship was well known in Hollywood, and friends believed she was the love of his life. In January 1942, tragedy struck. Lombard, returning from a war bond rally, died in a plane crash. Gable was devastated. He enlisted in the U.S. Air Force soon after, perhaps seeking both distraction and redemption. Although he returned to acting after the war, those closest to him said the joy had left his eyes. He remained a consummate professional, starring in films like The Hucksters and Mogambo, but privately, he wrestled with loneliness and grief. Later marriages brought companionship but never replaced Lombard's memory. Friends often remarked that he never truly recovered from her loss. In November 1960, shortly after completing The Misfits with Marilyn Monroe, Gable suffered a heart attack and died at 59. The film world mourned the loss of its king, but those who knew him understood his crown had always been heavy. Clark Gable's story reminds us that even legends can be undone by grief, and that love lost can haunt a lifetime. Dorothy Dandridge, Hollywood's racial barrier. Dorothy Dandridge was luminous, a singer, dancer, and actress, whose grace made her one of the most captivating performers of her era. In 1954, she became the first black woman nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress for her role in Carmen Jones. For a moment, it seemed as if Hollywood's doors might finally open. Yet behind her trailblazing success was a story of barriers, prejudice, and heartbreak. Born in Cleveland in 1922, Dorothy and her sister began performing as the Wonder Children, managed by their determined mother. By her teens, she was part of the Dandridge sisters, performing with artists like the Nicholas brothers. Hollywood soon noticed her striking beauty and talent, but roles for black actresses were scarce and often deeply stereotypical. Her breakthrough came with Carmen Jones, a performance brimming with fire and vulnerability. The Oscar nomination should have secured her future, but studios offered her little beyond limited or typecast parts. Hollywood's racism kept her from the kinds of roles routinely given to white contemporaries. Still, she persisted, starring in Porgy and Bess and touring internationally as a singer. Away from the spotlight, Dorothy's life was fraught with challenges. She endured failed marriages, financial difficulties, and the heavy responsibility of caring for her daughter, Harolyn, who required lifelong medical support. These burdens were compounded by the constant frustration of doors closing in her face because of prejudice. On September 8, 1965, Dorothy Dandridge was found dead in her apartment at only 42 years old. The official cause was an embolism, though some reports suggested an accidental overdose. Dandridge's brilliance was undeniable, but her struggles reveal how Hollywood's racial barriers crushed opportunities for even its most radiant trailblazers. Her legacy lives as both triumph and warning. Bela Lugosi, Dracula's Curse. Bela Lugosi gave the world one of cinema's most enduring figures, Count Dracula. With his thick accent, piercing eyes, and commanding presence, he brought to life a character that would forever define horror on screen. Yet the role that made him immortal also became a curse, trapping him in typecasting and leading to a lonely, difficult end. Born Bela Ferenc Blasco in Hungary in 1882, Lugosi worked as an actor in Europe before immigrating to the United States. His breakthrough came on Broadway in the late 1920s with the stage production of Dracula. When Universal Pictures adapted the play for film in 1931, Lugosi was cast, and his performance became iconic. The image of him in a cape intoning, "I am Dracula," is etched into cinema history. But success came with a shadow. Hollywood found his accent and intensity limiting, and soon he was pigeonholed into horror roles. While contemporaries like Boris Karloff found versatility, Lugosi struggled to escape Dracula's shadow. By the late 1930s and 40s, he was taking parts in low-budget films, far from the prestige he once dreamed of. His personal struggles mounted. Lugosi developed a dependency on morphine, initially prescribed for chronic pain. As work dried up, he fell into financial hardship. In 1955, he made headlines by becoming one of the first Hollywood stars to publicly enter rehabilitation for addiction. Though the move showed courage, it also underscored how far he had fallen from his Dracula fame. In 1956, Lugosi died of a heart attack at 73. At his request, he was buried in his Dracula cape, a final acknowledgement that the role he both cherished and resented would forever define him. Bela Lugosi's story reminds us that iconic roles can bring immortality, but also chains that bind an artist for life. Vivien Leigh, the fragile star of Tara. Vivien Leigh is forever remembered as Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, a performance so commanding it became a cornerstone of cinematic history. She also dazzled as Blanche Dubois in A Streetcar Named Desire, earning 2 Academy Awards. Yet behind her luminous beauty and extraordinary talent lay a life marked by fragile health and emotional turmoil. Born Vivian Mary Hartley in India in 1913, she moved to England as a child and pursued acting with fierce determination. Her striking looks and disciplined training quickly drew notice. By the late 1930s, she had married actor Laurence Olivier, beginning a celebrated partnership that made them one of theater's great power couples. Her role as Scarlett O'Hara in 1939 launched her into international stardom. Yet fame did not bring peace. Vivian suffered from bipolar disorder, then often misunderstood and poorly treated. She experienced long cycles of depression and mania, which strained her marriage and her career. Olivier, though devoted for years, struggled to cope with her unpredictable moods. Physical illness compounded her difficulties. Vivian contracted tuberculosis early in life, and it recurred throughout her adulthood. The grueling demands of acting, both on stage and screen, often clashed with her fragile health. Yet when she was able to perform, her brilliance never dimmed. Critics marveled at her ability to embody characters with both vulnerability and fire. Privately, Vivian expressed the exhaustion of living with such inner battles. Friends recalled her as both enchanting and deeply fragile, able to transform into her characters while struggling to hold on to herself. In 1967, at only 53, she succumbed to tuberculosis.